She slid the termination papers across the polished walnut conference table and told me to sign and walk away. Her voice was as cold as a mountain morning, showing no recognition of the 20 years I had dedicated to building this enterprise. She said my services were no longer required, speaking with the mechanical efficiency of someone who only understood spreadsheets. I simply smiled, reached into my pocket for my pen, and added one handwritten line that would cost the firm $18 million. My name is Stephen Miller, and I am 56 years old. For exactly 2 decades, from March 2005 to November 2025, I served as the Chief Technology Officer at Summit Defense Technologies, a specialized contractor developing advanced radar systems and military electronics. Our operations are based in Colorado Springs, right under the foothills of Cheyenne Mountain. When I joined the organization, it consisted of only 5 guys working out of a small strip mall office with $800,000 in annual revenue. By 2025, we had grown to 156 employees, generating $180 million annually. I built the entire technical infrastructure from scratch, developed 8 proprietary radar detection algorithms, and held patents worth millions of dollars. But the true reason my presence mattered was buried deep in Article 12, Section 4 of my original 2005 employment agreement. The entire journey began in February 2005 when the company existed only as a concept on paper. Franklin Henderson, 58 years old at the time, was a former Air Force colonel who had spent 30 years developing radar systems for the military. His daughter, Linda Henderson, 35, was an experienced project manager with top-secret clearance. Joseph Davis, 52, was Franklin's old Air Force colleague who understood government procurement rules completely. Helen Davis, 49, Joseph's sister, managed business development and knew every key procurement officer in the defense sector. They possessed a grand vision, but lacked technical leadership. The Air Force was modernizing its defense systems after the national security emergencies, and this team needed someone who could translate complex military specifications into functional technology. That was where I came in. I was 35 years old, working as a senior radar engineer down in Denver at Lockheed Martin, earning $75,000 a year. I possessed 12 years of engineering experience and a master's degree from the Colorado School of Mines. At Lockheed, I spent my days dealing with corporate bureaucracy, watching my best innovations get buried under endless committee reviews and corporate presentations. When Franklin approached me at an aerospace conference in February, his straightforward proposal was refreshing. He did not waste time with small talk. He described his vision and asked if I would consider joining them as their founding chief technology officer. I asked him about the compensation package. He offered $65,000 to start. He admitted it was a pay cut but explained they were offering something far more valuable. He handed me a draft contract containing 31 pages of standard terms. But attached at the end was Article 12, Founder Protections and Equity Participation. That specific clause caught my attention. Article 12, Section 4 was the critical element. It stated that the employee was designated as a founding technical executive and granted founder protections equivalent to founding partners. In the event of involuntary termination without documented cause, or voluntary resignation with complete settlement of all outstanding obligations, the employee would receive immediate vesting of 4% equity calculated at fair market valuation. If they terminated me without cause, or if I resigned while demanding a complete settlement of what they owed me, I would instantly own 4% of whatever the enterprise was worth. In 2005, that 4% was worth $15,000. But the clause had no ceiling and no cap. If the company grew to $400 million, my share would be worth $16 million. I asked Franklin why he was offering such a generous clause. He looked at me and said he wanted someone committed to the company for the long haul. He explained that he wanted a partner who would protect the technology, because protecting the technology protected their collective future. I accepted the offer but requested one modification. I wanted the contract to specify that I retained the explicit right to add handwritten amendments to any termination document, and that those amendments would become legally binding once signed by both parties. Franklin agreed to the modification. The final contract included this language: employee retains the explicit right to add handwritten modifications to any termination or separation agreement. Any separation agreement containing complete settlement of obligations shall trigger employees' founder protections unless specifically disclaimed in writing by both parties. We signed the agreement on March 1, 2005, with the entire group witnessing it. The document was notarized and filed with the state authorities. It was official, and it would become the smartest decision of my professional career. I left my comfortable job, ignored the warnings of my colleagues who thought a startup was too risky, and packed my tools to move to Colorado Springs. I was determined to prove that my designs could perform in the field under real conditions, and Franklin gave me the perfect sandbox to do so. Over the next 20 years, I built the entire technical foundation of Summit Defense Technologies. I developed our first proprietary radar algorithm for detecting stealth aircraft, a technology that remains highly classified. By 2012, our systems were protecting military bases in 12 countries, and we had secured 3 major defense contracts worth $45 million. My development team focused on advanced signal processing, clutter reduction, and multipath mitigation, transforming raw sensor data into clean tracking vectors. By 2025, I held 8 patents in my name, managed a team of 45 engineers, and our technology was considered the best in the industry. My salary reached $165,000 annually. I was offered the chief executive position 2 times, but I turned it down because I preferred hands-on engineering to corporate politics. I never forgot about Article 12. Every single year, I pulled out my original contract to read the provisions. I kept 1 copy in a fireproof safe at home and another with my attorney, verifying annually that the clause remained valid under our bylaws. I always knew someone might try to push me out eventually, but I did not expect it to happen. So soon after Franklin passed away, the founder died at 78 years old. He suffered a massive heart attack at his home and was gone before help arrived. His funeral was held on September 16th, and the entire company attended, along with clients and military personnel. We even had a 2-star general from NORAD present to pay his respects to Franklin's service. After he passed, Linda became the chairwoman of the board. Joseph remained as president, and Helen continued to manage business development. But they were exhausted. The organization had grown beyond their management capabilities, and they were drowning in operational details. Linda called me into her office a week after the funeral. She explained that they needed professional management and were hiring an executive search firm to find a new chief executive officer. I understood their decision, even though it stung. On October 8, 2025, the board announced they had hired Amanda Rogers as the new chief executive officer. She was 38 years old, possessed a master's degree from Wharton, and had worked as a consultant specializing in operational efficiency. Her profile was filled with corporate slogans about digital transformation. Amanda began her tenure on October 15th. Her first week was spent touring the facility and asking questions. My engineers were immediately suspicious of her corporate style, noting that she spent more time looking at organizational charts than discussing our actual technology. Then she hired Horizon Management Partners to conduct an efficiency assessment, costing $285,000. I challenged this decision during an executive meeting on October 22nd. I pointed out that we had just completed our strategic review and already had regular audits. Amanda smiled tightly and said they needed fresh eyes to identify cost reduction opportunities. She explained that the consultants specialized in reducing operational expenses by 30%. I knew exactly what that meant. They specialized in eliminating senior staff and replacing them with cheaper alternatives. The consultants arrived on November 1st. They were young, possessed no actual defense industry experience, and spent 3 weeks analyzing our organization. On November 18th, they presented their findings to the board. I was not invited, which was the first warning sign. That evening, Linda called me and asked me to come to her home. I drove over to her house and found her sitting at the kitchen table. She looked tired and stressed. She told me without preamble that the consultants had recommended eliminating several senior positions, including mine. I kept my voice steady and asked on what basis. She explained they claimed my role could be outsourced to Bangalore Engineering in India for 40% less cost. I pointed out that outsourcing classified defense work to India was impossible because our projects required security clearances. Linda admitted she and Joseph had argued against it, but Amanda had convinced the board that the cost savings were necessary. I asked her if she remembered my contract and the founder protection clause. Linda looked confused and asked what the clause was. I explained it was the agreement granting me 4% equity upon involuntary termination. There was a heavy silence. Linda asked me what the company was currently worth. Over the past 18 months, we had received 3 serious acquisition offers. The first came in June 2024 from Sentinel Equity Partners, who offered $380 million in cash. We declined because Franklin was not ready to sell. In January 2025, Nova Shield Corporation offered $420 million in stock. The board decided it was too risky. The most recent offer arrived in September, right after the funeral. Apex Defense Group offered $450 million in cash. The board had tabled it, but the offer established our fair market value clearly. I looked at Linda and explained that 4% of $450 million was $18 million. She went pale, realizing the financial disaster that was approaching her family's company. I could see the sweat on her forehead, and her husband, Daniel Bennett, nearly choked on his drink as he heard the number. They both sat there in complete shock, realizing that their new hotshot executive was about to drive the company off a financial cliff. Linda sat in complete silence for several minutes, staring down at her glass of wine as if she could find a solution hidden in the red liquid. Her husband Daniel Bennett was coughing, trying to regain his composure after hearing the staggering figure of $18 million. Linda admitted that she did not think Amanda Rogers knew anything about the Founder Protection Clause, explaining that many of our older corporate records were still stored in cardboard boxes in her late father's old study. When the Human Resources Department transitioned to digital systems back in 2020, the staff only scanned the active pages of the main employment contracts, completely ignoring the historical exhibits and original partnership agreements. Linda looked up, her eyes wide with worry, and asked if I would consider waiving my contractual rights. She suggested that I accept a standard severance package, walk away quietly, and allow the company to transition without causing a massive financial disturbance. I looked at this woman who had been like family to me for 2 decades and shook my head. I explained that I had given 20 years of my life to building this technology, worked countless weekends to secure their success, and turned down much higher salaries from major aerospace firms to remain loyal to her father's vision. I told her that if they wanted to cast me aside to improve their quarterly efficiency ratios, they would have to pay the exact price defined in my original contract. 3 days later, on November 25th, the calendar invite arrived. It was titled simply as a personnel discussion and scheduled for 3 o'clock in the executive conference room. I walked in at exactly 2 minutes before the hour. Amanda Rogers was sitting at the head of the long table, looking polished, confident, and completely detached from the reality of the engineering floor. She did not offer me coffee, nor did she acknowledge my years of service. She stated flatly that the board had decided to restructure our technical operations and that my position as Chief Technology Officer was being eliminated, effective December 31st. She explained that our engineering services would be outsourced to Bangalore Engineering, which would reduce our overall labor costs by 40%. She then slid a heavy burgundy portfolio across the table toward me. Inside was the standard separation agreement offering 10 weeks of severance pay, which amounted to $25,384 gross, along with 90 days of health insurance. I turned to page 3 and found the crucial sentence. Employee acknowledges this agreement constitutes complete settlement of obligations between employee and company. Those 6 words were the exact trigger phrase specified in my 2005 contract. Amanda had copied the agreement from a generic human resources database, completely blind to the legal trap she was setting for herself. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my black pen. I looked at Amanda and told her I wanted to write a small modification on the document. She did not even look up from her phone, stating arrogantly that the package was non-negotiable and that if I did not sign it immediately, I would receive nothing. I reminded her that my original employment contract, which was filed with the state incorporation documents, granted me the explicit right to add handwritten modifications to any separation agreement. She sighed, waved her hand dismissively, and told me to write whatever I wanted because she had a flight to catch. In clear, steady cursive, I wrote, "Pursuant to Article 12, Section 4 of Employment Agreement, dated March 1st, 2005, employee invokes founder protections and equity vesting at 4% of fair market valuation." I initialed the sentence as SM, signed my full name Stephen Miller, and wrote the date. Amanda took her expensive pen, signed her name below mine as Chief Executive Officer, and closed the folder, completely unaware that she had just committed the company to an $18 million liability. I walked out of the building and drove directly to the office of Laura Vance, my attorney. Laura was a sharp, experienced lawyer who had spent years in the military justice system before entering private practice. She read the separation agreement, compared it to the original 2005 contract, and looked at me with absolute disbelief. She asked if they had truly signed this without reading the handwritten text. I assured her they had. Laura calculated the potential payout at $18 million based on the recent acquisition offers. She advised me to wait 24 hours to let them discover their mistake. We immediately made 4 official copies of the signed agreement. 1 copy was placed in my personal home safe, the 2nd in Laura's secure office vault, the 3rd in my safety deposit box at the local bank, and the final copy was filed directly with the county clerk as a public record to ensure they could not claim the document was lost or modified after the fact. We sat in her office as the sun set over the mountains, quietly drinking coffee and marveling at how easily an arrogant manager could undo 20 years of corporate planning with a single stroke of a pen. I had dinner at a small quiet diner down the street, feeling a strange sense of peace as I ate my meal, knowing that the trap was set and the documentation was completely secure. The confrontation occurred the next morning at 8:47. I was in my office wrapping up some final engineering reports when I heard shouting coming from the executive suite down the hall. Joseph Davis was screaming, his voice echoing off the glass walls as he demanded to know who had authorized the agreement. He burst into my room, his face red and his hands shaking, holding a photocopy of the separation agreement. He ordered me into his office immediately. As we walked down the corridor, I glanced through the glass partition of the executive room and saw Amanda Rogers sitting at her desk, gripping her phone with white knuckles and looking as though she had just witnessed her entire career crumble. In his office, Joseph slammed the door so hard that the frame rattled. He demanded to know what I had written on the paper. I remained calm, sat down, and explained that I had merely exercised my contractual rights, adding the handwritten modification to trigger my founder protections. Joseph yelled that they would fight this in court for a decade and that I would not receive a single dollar. I stood up and reminded him that the original contract was witnessed by him and his sister, notarized, and active for 20 years. I explained that they had no legal basis to challenge the document and that they would lose a public lawsuit. 3 hours later, Laura Vance called to inform me that the company's general counsel had contacted her, claiming there was a contractual misunderstanding and offering a slightly larger severance package. Laura told them that there was no misunderstanding and that the only number we would discuss was $18 million. The board refused, and by the end of the afternoon, they filed a lawsuit in the local district court, seeking a declaratory judgment to void the handwritten modification. The hearing was scheduled for December 18th, with Judge William Thornton, Presiding over the case, Summit Defense Technologies hired Richard Bradley, a senior partner, from a prominent Denver firm who charged $850 an hour. Bradley stood before the judge and argued that the handwritten clause was an unconscionable drafting anomaly that should be declared void. He argued that no reasonable board of directors would allow an engineer to claim 4% of a $450 million company based on a routine separation agreement. He claimed the financial result shocked the conscience of the court. During my cross-examination, Bradley tried to paint me as a manipulative employee who had taken advantage of an unsuspecting executive. He asked if I honestly believed I was worth $18 million. I looked him dead in the eye and explained that the value was not determined by my opinion, but by the market offers they had received and the patents I had built. When it was Laura's turn, she stood up and presented the facts clearly and without emotion. She explained that the Founder Protection Clause was not an oversight, but a deliberate decision by the founder to protect the creator of the technology that built the company. She detailed how I had spent 2 decades developing the radar systems, secured 8 patents, managed 45 engineers, and turned down higher salaries to remain loyal. She showed the judge the original 2005 contract, which explicitly permitted handwritten modifications. Laura argued that Amanda Rogers had the opportunity to read the document before signing it, and that her failure to do so represented clear corporate negligence. To drive the point home, Laura called Amanda to the stand and asked her under oath if she had read the handwritten sentence before signing the document. Amanda looked down and admitted she had not, claiming she was busy preparing for a board meeting. Laura then argued that under established Colorado contract law, a party cannot escape their contractual obligations simply because they chose not to read the document they signed. Judge Thornton reviewed the contracts carefully, reading the Founder Clause and the separation agreement word for word. He looked at Bradley and asked if the chief executive officer had signed the paper after the handwritten text was added. Bradley admitted she had, but claimed she did not comprehend the legal consequences of the handwritten terms. The judge ruled that contracts are the foundation of business relationships. He stated that when an executive signs a document, they are bound by its terms, and their later regrets do not void their obligations. He denied the company's motion and ruled that the clause was valid and triggered. Additionally, Laura prepared a separate lawsuit detailing a breach of fiduciary duty by the board members. She argued that the directors had failed to protect shareholder value by hiring an executive who signed binding contracts without reviewing historical documents. Faced with a secondary lawsuit that would expose their personal assets and destroy the pending sale of the company, the board realized they had no choice. They agreed to drop their appeals and settle the $18 million debt, instructing their financial team to prepare the wire transfer for the middle of February. The court reporter stopped typing, the silence in the room, heavy as the reality of the ruling, settled over the company's directors. Joseph Davis sat with his hands on his face, muttering that their upcoming acquisition was now in serious jeopardy. Richard Bradley could only offer a weak explanation to the board about why his arguments had failed to convince the judge. They had spent thousands of dollars on his counsel, only to be reminded of the basic principles of contract law. The wire transfer was completed on February 14, 2026, hitting my attorney's trust account shortly before noon. The financial details were staggering. The federal tax rate for my bracket was 39.6%, and the state income tax was 9.9%, bringing the total tax obligation to 49.5%. After paying the state and federal governments their share, I was left with a net sum of $9,100,000. I was completely satisfied with the outcome, knowing that my family's financial security was established forever. I visited my local bank branch to confirm the transaction. The bank manager, who had known me for 10 years as a modest engineer with a normal checking account, looked at the screen, went pale, and immediately escorted me into a private office. He asked if there was anything he could do to assist me, offering premium wealth management services. I simply smiled, thanked him, and requested a standard printed receipt showing the new balance. I wanted to keep it as a physical reminder of the journey. The corporate fallout inside Summit Defense Technologies was swift and devastating. Amanda Rogers was terminated on December 20th, just 2 days after the court ruling. The board officially declared her hiring to be the single most expensive mistake in the history of the corporation. The company was also forced to pay $350,000 in legal fees, and the morale of the entire engineering department was completely shattered. The staff realized that the executives valued cost-cutting over the actual contributors who built the systems. In April 2026, Linda Henderson, Joseph Davis, and Helen Davis decided they had had enough of the corporate pressure. They sold the company to Sentinel Equity Partners for $410 million. This price was exactly $40 million less than the previous appraisal, because my $18 million payout had been deducted directly from the company's net worth. The 3 board members retired and moved to warmer states, having learned a very expensive lesson about corporate loyalty and contract management. Within 6 months, the new private equity owners gutted the company, laid off half the engineering staff, and moved the remaining operations to a cheaper facility in Texas. They outsourced the core technical work to Bangalore Engineering, which ultimately ruined the quality of their radar systems and led to the cancellation of several key government contracts. I was 56 years old and completely finished with corporate bureaucracy and executive politics. I invested my net payout into a diversified portfolio of municipal bonds and low-cost index funds, which generates approximately $365,000 in annual passive income. This is more than enough to support my family, fund my sister's graduate school education, and cover my mother's medical expenses. I called my sister to tell her that her tuition was fully paid, and she cried with relief. I also spoke to my mother, reassuring her that her healthcare costs were completely covered. They both could not believe that the contract I signed 20 years ago had protected our family so well when the company decided to betray me. My sister was studying for her master's degree in structural engineering at the time, and she promised me that she would design every bridge and building with the same attention to detail that I had applied to my radar algorithms. My mother told me she was incredibly proud of the way I had handled the situation, remembering how my father had always told us that a person's word and their signature were their most sacred commitments. Their relief was the ultimate reward of my entire career. I established a small consulting firm to help independent software developers and engineers protect their intellectual property from corporate exploitation. I hired my former intern to join me, and he was thrilled to work in an environment that valued technical skill and honesty. We rented a small office in downtown Denver, set up our computer servers, and began helping local technology startups draft their employment contracts to prevent the same kind of exploitation I had faced. In addition to my consulting work, I began teaching a course on engineering ethics at the Colorado School of Mines. I share the story of the handwritten contract with my students every semester, not to boast, but to teach them an important truth. I explain to them that corporate managers will call you family when they need your labor, but they will replace you the moment the spreadsheet suggests a cost savings. During the class discussion, one student asked if I regretted the damage to the company. I told him that I did not. The company chose to violate its principles of loyalty, and the legal system simply held them to the promises they had made. The true power in your career does not lie in a grand title or a large salary. It lies in reading the fine print, maintaining your integrity, and having the courage to stand your ground. The executives who believed they could dismiss my contribution discovered that their authority was nothing compared to the documented truth. I walked away from the experience with my integrity intact and my future secured, having proved that the individuals who build the foundation are the ones who ultimately control the structure. The lesson cost them $18 million. But for my students and myself, the value of that lesson was truly priceless.